Hello everyone, Randy Stifer here with conservedphoto.com. Today we're starting a new feature here on Conserved Photo, Lens Gems. We're going to do some quick videos just to highlight some of our favorite lenses and some lenses that people kind of forget about, but they're really nice lenses for a decent price. Today we're going to start with the Tamron 60mm f2 macro, and this lens is in my bag right now in Sony mount, and I use it on my A77 Mark II quite often when I need to get up really close to things. It's a great insect photo lens, and it's also a great lens for street photography, and I'll show you an example of that later. The full name of this is the Tamron SP AF 60mm f2 DI 2 LD IF 1:1 macro. I know that's a mouthful, but most people know it as the Tamron 60mm macro, and that's plenty good enough to identify it. Currently the price at B&H is $524. The used price on Amazon right now is $329. So while not a cheap lens, it's a reasonable lens. Competitors in the 60mm macro range are actually on average cheaper, but they're f2.8, and I'll get to that later. So let's go on to the pros of this lens. It doubles as both a macro and a portrait lens. This lens gives you really nice portrait shots. That f2 really helps with that, and it's a 1:1 macro, which means that the smallest thing you can fill the frame of your photo with is the exact same size as your sensor. So it's really excellent for getting really close to small things. Now, number two is f2. And this is one stop better than its competitors. Take, for instance, Canon has a 60mm f2.8. Last time I checked, it's selling for like right around $390, I think. That's a nice little lens, but that extra stop of light is going to come in handy. And on a crop sensor, which this lens is only for crop sensors, is really important because it's going to help you get that narrow depth of field that you would get on a full frame camera with the 90 to 100mm macros that are prevalent for full frame cameras. Tamron's got a pretty advanced feature on this lens called full-time manual focus override. What this allows you to do is that when you've got it set to autofocus and it locks on, you can then use the focus ring to adjust where it's focused at and then take the photograph. And this really helps with macro because a lot of times it'll focus on a leaf or a limb or a twig instead of the flower or the insect that you're really trying to get the focus on, and so you need to make a little adjustment to get it right. With that, let's go on and look at the cons of this lens. The first con, the biggest con for a lot of people, is that this lens is only good on APS-C cameras, often referred to as crop sensor cameras. These cameras have a smaller sensor than the size of 35mm film, and a lot of people shy away from lenses made for APS-C sensors because they have a goal of eventually upgrading to a full frame camera. Now, I want to make a point though, that when it comes to crop sensor cameras, there is an advantage for them when shooting macro, and that is that a 1:1 lens is a 1:1 lens. It will reproduce, the smallest thing it will reproduce and fill the frame of your photograph with is the size of your sensor. Well, a crop sensor is smaller than a full frame sensor, so therefore you can fill the frame with something smaller if you use a crop sensor camera. So that's one advantage that crop sensors actually have in macro over full frame. Number two, like all macro lenses, it's a little slower to focus, and that's because it focuses much closer than a normal prime lens, and it also still focuses all the way out to infinity, so it has a wider range to rack through, and so it takes a little bit longer to get focused. But I can tell you that this lens, once it gets to where the focus is at, it locks on quick. There's no hunting, and that's a really good thing. And that's our look at the Tamron SP 60mm macro. Now let's go on to a couple of samples of my photographs taken with this lens. First off, we got a macro of a monarch butterfly down at Natural Bridges here in Santa Cruz, and as you can see, really narrow depth of field. I believe this was f8, which is something that you need to understand about macro lenses. When photographing at macro distances, f8 will feel like f2.8 because the closer you get to the subject, the less depth of field you get, so you need to keep using higher and higher f-stops in order to have some depth of field. And now I promised you a street photography example, and here it is. This is taken downtown Santa Cruz, converted to black and white, obviously. It just gives you a really good idea of how sharp this lens is and how it is versatile. You can use it for a lot of different things. And that's our first episode of Lens Gems with the 60mm macro from Tamron. Have a great day and get out there and enjoy some nature.